going to do it for your International Championship, brought to you by Raw Star Assurance. But join me at 11 o'clock for a full weather update. Desmond and Ladon.
Well, I know a lot of Bahamians are happy they can keep their AC units off and keep that BPL bill down.
I'm just excited to be bundling up, Desmond, just to wear my scarf and my socks and, you know, just to wear warm clothing is good for me.
You love it. You love it. And I'm loving it, too.
Let's swing it over to Matea Cunningham for Let's Talk Socials.
Good evening and welcome back to Let's Talk Socials. Today, we're getting into something that affects us all, whether we realize it or not. Let's break down the mystery behind social media algorithms. What's an algorithm? In simple terms, it's a set of rules or a formula that platforms use to decide what content you see. Think of it as your app's brain. It takes everything it knows about you and serves up content it thinks you'll like. Most algorithms analyze three main factors: engagement. What do you like, comment on, save, or share the most? These interactions signal to the algorithm that you enjoy this type of content, so it shows you more of it. Relevance. The algorithm considers how recent or trendy a post is and how closely it matches your interests. If you're into food content, for example, expect more recipes and restaurant reviews. Relationships. Who you interact with often. The algorithm prioritizes posts from people you message, tag, or frequently engage with, ensuring you stay connected to your inner circle. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook use these factors differently, though. Staying adaptable is key. Experiment with new formats like Reels, use trending sounds, and post consistently to keep up. And remember, while algorithms seem complex, they're designed to enhance your experience, showing you what you'll most likely enjoy. So the next time you scroll and think, how does this app know me so well? Now you know. I'm Matea, and thanks for tuning in to Let's Talk Socials. I'll see you guys next week.
Well, that does it for Access Now. Tomorrow's show is promising to be exciting. We have a saxophonist.
Special guest in the house tomorrow to serenade us into the weekend.
Oh, man.
I know you're excited. I'm excited about that. Have a good night, everybody.
Take care. Thanks.
At Fort Montague, I'm Opal Roach. This is ZNS.
What is the Central Bank of the Bahamas? It was the 1st of June in 1974, a year filled with promise and enthusiasm as the fledgling nation of the Bahamas started to find its footing and establish itself as a country of note. With the thrill of recent independence still ringing in the air, the atmosphere in the nation was teeming with possibility and promise. Against this backdrop, we established one of the nation's finest organizations, the Central Bank of the Bahamas.
The story of the Central Bank of the Bahamas is best told through its staff. The traditional story of how we got here, we came out of the Bahamas Monetary Authority when an independent Bahamas formed in 1973. The Central Bank Act of 1974 created the Central Bank of the Bahamas.
The Central Bank is here to instill financial stability. We're here to make sure that the economy is stable to the extent that one can, because you're really supervising financial institutions, and the financial institutions make up a substantial part of the country's economy.
The Central Bank, in its mission statement, says that their mission is to foster an environment of monetary stability conducive to economic development and to ensure a stable and sound financial system. Now, in that role, what is very important is the promotion of a stable environment for the conduct of business, all business. And so when we have a stable financial system, then we become more attractive for inward investment, and as well the environment for local businesses to conduct their business and to thrive is better.
Well, when I think about the central bank, I think about the work that the central bank does behind the scenes to keep the economy on a stable footing, which is the emphasis on making certain that everything transpires the way it should, and that we're able to preserve the value of our Bahamian dollar at 1-to-1 with the United States, and everything that goes into that, and how we communicate that to the public.
Now, the role of the central bank, again, is critical because we have international obligations that we have ascribed to, the Basel core principles for banking supervision. We are reviewed against those, and the Bank Supervision Department and the central bank is responsible for that. That assists in making sure that our financial system can communicate on a global scale with other global players.
My memorable and proud moment at the central bank was basically to get the local banking community, to build the confidence of the local banking community that the policies and procedures were applied evenly and fairly throughout the industry. No one escaped the role of the bank supervision, no licensee escaped the role of the bank supervision department. And I recall telling a particular banker that who complained about the scrutiny of his institution. I recall telling him that he should take comfort in knowing that we not only do this with other licensees, but with any applicant seeking to do banking from the Bahamas. We had to give them the confidence that not only were we protecting the Bahamas as an offshore financial center, but we were ensuring that the individual players within that international financial center were of reputable nature so that it didn't bring any disrepute on the banking community of the Bahamas.
While the Central Bank of the Bahamas was a household name to many, it can appear to be shrouded in mystery, especially as its role in day-to-day banking evolved.
The central bank is very important to the success of this country and definitely to the success of every individual that resides within it. If we don't know who we are or what the purpose of the central bank is, we can perhaps be a little lost and not reach our true potential.
Financial literacy is one of the emphasis that the central bank has pushed increasingly more. What it does is it empowers the average person to understand how the economy works, how what the central bank does is supposed to be achieving certain types of results. But one of the most important and the most powerful things about financial literacy, as I would like to term it, is that it's almost like you're giving the public the switch with which they can, quote unquote, beat you with if necessary. So because now you're empowering them to be able to objectively assess, what you're doing and the impact of what you're doing, and to ask the right kinds of questions about policies. And that empowerment is especially important when you think about individuals having the sort of transactional relationship with financial institutions, understanding how those sort of arrangements should look and the kinds of inquiries they should be making of financial services. So financial literacy really is the best weapon that you can use if you're talking about consumer financial protection, because now you have an educated financial consumer who can behave in the right way and who can ask the kinds of questions that matter.
An institution like the central bank, obviously it is fairly complex. It has different roles that it has to play. And there is sometimes, I think, in the public, the perception that an institution like this is carrying out policies which are harmful to me as an individual. Let me give you one example. If we go back, as I say, back 20 years, you had a much more I would say, present, felt impact of what we call exchange control. And exchange control is simply the process by which Bahamian residents are allowed to have access or have availability to foreign currency. So if you want to take a trip to the States and you need, $1,000, you need to be able to convert Bahamian dollars to US dollars.
Exchange controls is fundamentally based in trying to keep the Bahamas dollar at par with the US, that is, currency parity and currency security. We do that primarily through making sure that the level of reserves that the country holds is substantial enough to keep the country's imports and exports flowing as the country would need. I often joke with some of my colleagues that no one ever thinks about how substantial the role of the bank is in managing the foreign reserves until you potentially run into a situation where you don't have enough foreign reserves that allows us to complete the export and import function that we do as a part of our daily activities.
From its very inception, the central bank sought out the best and the brightest from both near and far. Its founders knew the importance of a gifted, competent workforce and were able to get them excited about the groundbreaking work they were doing for the good of their country.
The early years at the central bank was awesome. I came in at the tender age of 18, and I was looking for a family, really. You don't want to have a place where you go and you feel like you're an outsider. And the persons that I dealt with in the accounts department where I was initially placed, they were like parents. I had not a young lady, but she was the elder of the department, Welma Smith. And she took everybody, and we call her Mama Smith. So there was a big family atmosphere. The staff numbers was lower than they are now. I think there was about probably 100 or so now, probably close to 200-300. And that came from the top. The family atmosphere came from the top. T.B. Donaldson was our governor, and he was charismatic. He was caring. He was a family-oriented type leader. And that went through all of the departments. And we worked sometimes overtime without even asking. That was the atmosphere. We loved what we were doing, and we felt appreciated by our managers and our supervisors, and we just did whatever we had to do to get the job done.
To see how we used to get along with one another, never row and never carry on with one another. If we have something, we have a function to do, everybody invited to it. But like working in the central bank, you don't have no one accusing you or carrying on robbing you and telling you this thing and next thing. Everybody talking and laughing with one another, and when it's time to do the work, they're doing their work.
The role of the governor. Leadership is mission critical for any organization. The title of governor of the central bank is responsible for oversight of all departments within the central bank. It's a position that requires expertise on all bank functions. Each of the central bank governors has proven to be a gifted leader in their own right.
I would say that in the role of governor, you're responsible for everything that goes on in the central bank, and therefore you're expected to understand how the work is pulled together in the various parts of the bank, and when it is necessary to roll up your sleeve and to help get that work done. So, I mean, it's not a role where you sit at a distance and you just give commands and orders and the work miraculously appear. It's really something where you work alongside people to get the work done, and then you work with them in terms of how the bank communicates to the public what the bank is doing.
Even though the central bank boasts 6 excellent governors, past and present, there was one that started it all. That person was the late T. Basil Donaldson, an accomplished businessman and economist, the first governor of the Central Bank of the Bahamas.
Now I'm going to tell my age because I have worked with 5 of the 6 governors, except the current governor. So I worked with Governor Donaldson, Governor Allen, Governor Smith, and Governor Wendry Craig and Julian Francis, all 5 of them. They had different styles. Governor T.B. Donaldson was very charismatic. That's what I remember about him. He was very down to earth. He loved his staff. He would come around and hail us, and he would actually spend time talking to us, and he had a very open door policy. If you needed anything, if you wanted to speak with him, any level of staff could approach his secretary for an appointment, and he was very knowledgeable. You know, I appreciated the knowledge that he shared because at the time he was governor, I was doing finishing off my bachelor's degree in finance and accounting with the University of Miami. They used to bring their lecturers over to Nassau to do the bachelor's program. And I remember one day I was sitting at my desk doing my economics homework. I was taking a couple minutes out, and he was very quiet. All of a sudden, I felt this presence standing over me. And of course, I was only 2 years in the bank. So I was very nervous when I looked up and I saw the governor. And what did he do? He said, "Are you having problems with that?" He said, "Why don't you come to my office and let's talk about it?" Because he one of his, degrees was economics. So we were able to go through that. So I remember him as a people's person, as a charismatic person, and a knowledgeable governor.
I recall my first days in the bank working with T. Basil Donaldson. As a 16-year-old, he was a governor who called me to his office every Wednesday morning. He's the top guy, and I was a teenager, and he called me to his office to go over the legislation and the regulations and to make sure I knew my job. This was the top guy. But when I walked into his office, the governor's suite, the carpet was gold. The furniture was exquisite. He had a chauffeur before the Prime Minister had a chauffeur.
The late Sir William Allen joined the Bahamas Monetary Authority as manager of research in 1970. He became governor on 1st of June, 1980. Following an extensive career in banking and finance, Sir William went on to serve in the government of the Bahamas as Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance and Planning. In 2000, Sir William was made a Knight Commander of the Most Excellent Order of St. Michael and George.
Mr. Allen came along. He would have built upon a lot of the work of Mr. Donaldson. We give Mr. Allen a lot of credit for how the central bank increased its role in contributing culturally to the development of the Bahamas. So Mr. Allen would have been one of those who championed the art program, and we've really run with that, and it has evolved since then.
Sir William's work within the bank is well documented in statistics and figures. His path to the central bank was anything but clear. The best person to speak to his lived experience leading up to and within the central bank is his wife, Lady Aloma Allen.
For William, a very exciting time. For me and for the children, also exciting, but not quite grasping fully what was to come. For him, he was just excited, fully dedicated to what he was doing. I think he had more of a vision of where this was going to take him and the country. Sir Lyndon, who was Mr. Penling at the time, had a meeting in New York, and after 10 years of William working and putting himself through school with children, we went to that meeting, and he went in to speak with Mr. Penling. At the time, William was going to had completed his master's and was working on a PhD because we didn't know what was coming next. He had come home before and applied for 3 jobs, and they all told him he was overqualified. So we felt there was nothing here for us, sadly felt. And so he started preparing for his PhD, looking to become maybe a professor at one of the Ivy League schools. So we were looking and to buy a home. But after that meeting, we were in the car, and he said, I think we're changing direction. We're going to do what we both want, go home. I said, well, what happened? What convinced you? He said one simple thing he said to me. He said, Bill, I know you're preparing for your PhD, and I know you now, after a long struggle, and now settling into a comfortable life. But you have to come to help the country when it needs it. They need you now because you have a background in accounting, economics. You have experience on Wall Street. He worked personally with Mr. J.C. Penney, John Cash Penney, overseeing some personal things for him, and which gave him, and he had worked in other positions at Abercrombie and Fitch. So Mr. Penney simply said, if you want to help your country, you have to come when the country needs you. Not 2 years later, they need you now, because we need a research department set up at the central bank if we're going to be a central bank. He actually loved the hard work. This is what I couldn't get over. My routine every night was about 11 saying, do you think it's time to come to bed? Can you wait until tomorrow? No. This can go on till 2, 3. Once he sat up till 6 a.m. and went to work at 9. Because he completed whatever it was in front of him. He would not stop.
Mr. James Smith was appointed governor of the Central Bank of the Bahamas on the 1st of February, 1987. Mr. Smith previously served as permanent secretary and secretary for revenue in the Ministry of Finance, where he was actively involved in the development of fiscal policy.
Well, I remember my first day quite vividly. In February of 1987, I entered the bank, and I kind of knew that the first day was important in establishing yourself vis-a-vis the bank. And I had arranged a meeting with the management on that first day at 9 in the morning. I got there, went into the boardroom, took my seat, and sat there alone for 10 minutes, and the first manager came in, and then over the next 10 minutes, the rest of them came in, and when they took their seats, I got up and I left the room. I came back, I put my head in the door and told them that I'm the new governor, and anytime we have a meeting going forward, I expect you all to be in the room before me. And therefore, this meeting has been postponed until tomorrow, and you know what I expect. And so I left, and we had the meeting the next day, and well, from that point forward, I didn't have a problem with, the managers. It was a question of who's in charge. And, I was. And so we got along pretty fine after that.
When I think about James Smith, he focused, I think, on really entrenching even a lot more capacity development framework within the central bank. So a lot of the central bankers who would have gotten the on-the-job sponsorship for higher studies, etc., that reflected that we adopted a lot of the training frameworks that were in place in central government. And Mr. Smith came into the central bank from that background, and so we were able to copy from some of the, the positive frameworks and how government operates.
I was a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, and one of my duties was to liaise with the central bank. So I had frequent meetings with the governor then. I knew most of the senior staff. Well, they certainly knew me, because the central bank and the Ministry of Finance were not always on all fours, for many different reasons. They were in charge of monetary policy. We had fiscal policy. So, and of course, I knew the governor quite well at the time. And when he resigned, the Minister of Finance, who would have been Prime Minister Pilling at the time, just gave me a call and he said that the governor is leaving the bank and I want you to go immediately and take over. And of course I went. I had to resign from the public service. But the central bank itself and what it does was really not foreign to me. I had been following them ever since I got with the Ministry of Finance, and I'd been meeting with them frequently as the liaison officer.
I would say that personally what impressed me about Mr. Smith, and if I think about how it influences how, as governors, I think we are supposed to interact with central bankers, is that I remember writing a paper on monetary union or integration in the Caribbean, and some of the comments I put in it, and no more than maybe 3 years into my career in the research department, and he sent back the paper with very constructive comments, very positive and constructive comments. I don't think we agreed on everything, but the bottom line was that it showed you that even then, if central bankers as researchers were motivated and they were doing work, they could be assured that they would get the feedback from whatever level it was necessary to get it from in the central bank. So I thought that was very positive in terms of the kind of engagement a governor was willing to have.
The central bank, in pursuing its policies on monetary policies, credit and banking, during my period, and I suppose even today, it was always a high-pressure job because the country was going through a series of crises, mostly because of the money we were bringing in as taxes and the kind of money we were spending. So there was always a deficit, and a deficit had to be funded. And the central bank would play a role in that because it's the banker to the government. It would actually arrange for issuing the treasury bills or the bonds when the government is borrowing money, locally or abroad. But more importantly, when the government borrows money, it has an impact on the wider economy in terms of interest rates, and central bank had to keep an eye on that and on the level of credit, because if the government enters the market to borrow, they could borrow at a rate in which it crowds out the private sector. In crowding out the private sector, it means that businesses big and small may be unable to expand, and that has implications for unemployment, rising. So we would be, as a bank, in the middle of all of those policy decisions and advising the government on these things. And of course, the government had its own agenda and also the final say. So there was always a bit of tension. And if you were running the bank at that time, there were many sleepless nights.
Mr. Julian W. Francis was appointed to the post of Deputy Governor and member of the bank's Board of Directors in 1993. Mr. Francis was appointed Governor of the Central Bank of the Bahamas on the 1st of February, 1997. In 2000, the honor of Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire was conferred on Mr. Francis.
My experience with the central bank really was, I would say, life-changing for me. When I came to the central bank, I came from the private banking industry. I never really anticipated that I would become part of a regulatory institution, which the central bank is. But I was invited to join the bank as a deputy governor, in 1993. And I have to say that from that point, it was a roller coaster learning experience. I mean, every single month, every single week was new and was different and was crammed with all kinds of different responsibilities and experiences. And for me, it was really a tremendous time.
I think when we look at Julian Francis, again, everything is situational. And Mr. Francis took over as governor during a period when we went through the first rounds of adjustments to Financial Action Task Force and all of the international initiatives that put a lot of pressure on the international banking side of our economy. So he was one of those who sat through a lot of the major legislative overhaul that took place in the country. And interestingly, Governor Allen was in central government at the time, so he would have also shadowed some of the changes that were going on that related to how we tried to promote the viability of financial services.
One of the reasons that I was invited to join the bank by the then Minister of Finance, Sir William Allen, was that I did have a good deal of experience abroad in banking. I believe that the government felt that the particular experience which I had and the background which I had was, let's say, convenient or was compatible with the job that I was intended to do, the deputy governor's job initially, with the likelihood that I would become governor at the end of the current governor's term. So I think that my experience in the international banking sector, but even more broadly, my experience in private banking as a whole, was really something in particular which the powers at the time were really looking for. And I would say as well that this was an element that I brought to the bank which I think was quite welcomed by some of the people within the bank.
Mrs. Wendy Craig was appointed the first female governor of the Central Bank of the Bahamas on the 1st of June, 2005. Mrs. Craig began her career as a central banker in 1978 when she was appointed junior economist in the research department and was subsequently promoted to economist in 1980.
My name is Wendy Craig. I am a former governor of the Central Bank of the Bahamas and currently an economic advisor with the Ministry of Finance.
When I first joined the Central Bank, we were under the leadership of Wendy Craig, who was the first and currently only female governor of the Central Bank. That was very important to me. That isn't something that I had ever seen. And it was certainly, it's always good to have representation and to be able to see yourself in a leadership role. And while her track and mine would have been certainly different, I want to say that that was comforting.
My career with the Central Bank actually started in 1978, quite a long time ago. And I began, many people are not aware that I actually began in the bank supervision department, where I spent about 2 months before there was a need in the research department. And so I was able to transition there. And I came in at the entry level, junior economist, and I actually worked my way up.
Well, the central bank became fully automated in its operation during Governor Craig's tenure. So that was important. She would have also, in terms of the financial services side, presided over some of the transformation that were happening, say, in the payments system space, where we started out still in a very manual process of processing checks. So during Governor Craig's tenure, we would have seen the digitalization or the early digitization of the way payments were being processed in our system, particularly driving the commercial banks to establish the automated clearinghouse. She would have also presided over some of the other legislative framework that were put in place to bring credit unions under the supervision of the central bank, as well as the work on the specific legislation that speak to some of the modernization initiatives that are still going on in the payment space.
She was very much into IT. She loved that. And she was able to really put us on the map with the databases and workflow through, without paper and whatnot. And she didn't like paper. And by the time I left, like I said before, she was able to have digital signatures, and the central bank moved on from there. I know it's gone light years ahead of where I was in 2014.
My career was long enough for me to experience a lot of things, to experience the way the central bank works, and certainly based on the progression to become more involved in a lot of the decision-making of the bank. I didn't feel as if I had anything stacked against me as the first female governor. Really, I had come through the ranks of the bank. I was known by everyone, so it wasn't anything. They knew the way I operated, and they had an opportunity to work with me. And so I had the support of the managers, and they actually saw it as a natural evolution. I guess some more than me. But it wasn't difficult at all. And I always indicate that the central bank never had a glass ceiling for females. I never got that impression. And if you look back at the history of the central bank, females were occupying key positions in the central bank from the very beginning, and even today. So that's never been an issue. Once you're able to perform, and people deem you as credible in terms of your positions and your commitment, it's okay. It's not a problem at all.
John A. Roll was appointed governor of the Central Bank of the Bahamas in the month of January 2016. During the 3 years leading up to this, he served as the financial secretary in the Ministry of Finance. There he spearheaded the implementation of the government's fiscal reform initiatives, which included the introduction of value-added tax, VAT, strengthening of tax administration systems, and enhancing expenditure control frameworks.
My first time in the central bank was in the very late 1980s. I spent 2 successive summers here as a summer student. Nowadays we refer to them as interns. And that was in the research department, where I got the initial exposure to what the central bank does. And subsequently, after my studies in university, and I was searching for work, the central bank was one of those places that I interviewed first, and they made the first offer, and I joined the bank.
Despite having spent the majority of his career at the central bank, Governor Roll was not exactly a career central banker. He spent many years working and studying within other organizations, both at home and abroad, equipping him for the role of governor.
I would have returned to the central bank around the time when there were changes happening within the Ministry of Finance, as well as changes happening in terms of how the Bahamas is represented at the IMF, because there is a role at the IMF that is typically reserved for persons coming out of country. After returning from my second stint of studies abroad, I went to the IMF in 2009, spent 3 years there in a senior advisor role, which was not much different from the work I did at the central bank, except now you're expected to be able to speak authoritatively on what matters for an entire Caribbean constituency. And again, the issues were not too much different from what would have been of importance for the Bahamas. So after 3 years at the IMF, I returned to the Bahamas and moved into the Ministry of Finance for, I think, about another 3 years in the financial secretary role, which is good because now you get to see how government works from that side. And after my stint in the Ministry of Finance, I will have returned to the central bank in the role of governor. And the progression that I have had, it also reflects that in the Bahamas, we've done a very good job of succession planning for the leadership of the central bank. So by the time as an individual is at the position where they move into the leadership, I don't think it's usually a surprise that they move into that level. So I think the succession planning process prepares and trains the future leaders. Thinking about, what I would like to be remembered for, what I think I would be remembered for. Interestingly, it's one of those things that I don't think you focus on too much. But what I can say has been very important in terms of the continued transformation and progression of the central bank is that we've done a lot in the last decade to look at how we can make the exchange control administration process less bureaucratic, less intrusive for the public. We've also done a lot more in those areas where exchange control is still very guarded around use of foreign exchange to make the process more accessible where people are aspiring to make investments outside the country. So I would say the improvement that we continue to make in exchange control space very carefully, not to do anything that's going to damage the ability to hold on to the dollar being one-to-one. I think that has been very important. The other thing, and I think this is going to be even more important as time progresses, is that the central bank has embraced the importance of being more communicative with the public. And being more communicative also means, in many cases, just explaining to people how things are set, or how we say in Bahamian terms, how the war is set, so to speak, because understanding how things work and why certain policies or approaches might be taken is more important often than people necessarily agreeing with everything or every specific thing that the central bank does. So I would say the communications is very important, and that is an area where, as a central bank, we see a need to continue to push so that you have the transparency with in terms of the public.
When you think about the nation's primary banking institution, art may not be the first thing that comes to your mind. However, the central bank continued to distinguish itself not just as a leader in policy, but as the nation's oldest art gallery, with one of the finest collections in the region.
Central Bank celebrating 50 years and the art gallery, art program celebrating 40 years. It is important to recognize that, again, there's that 10-year span, to recognize that after 10 years of developing the Central Bank of the Bahamas, the Central Bank of the Bahamas saw fit to invest in art program. And there's one thing that is so important for us to understand, that very few things last in this country culturally for more than 10 years, more than 20 years. Things fizzle out. And we talk about Tavares, and we talk about Laval, and we talk about Lillian Blades, and Dr. Erica James, and Dr. Krista Thompson. They all came through the Central Bank of the Bahamas, and that is worthy of great celebration. I feel privileged that the Central Bank of the Bahamas, while celebrating 50 years of independence, feels so important to highlight this art program that has been involved and developed over 40 years.
The late William Allen was, he started the In-Service Award program, the strong focus on training. He also realized very early on that the central, and I guess it was from his travels to other central banks, that the central bank was in a unique position to be able to support other elements of the economy, and one of those was art. And so he started the art exhibitions. And if you look today, the central bank has one of the largest collections of arts in the Bahamas. And this is something he saw as our contribution, that could be the central bank's contribution to the Bahamian economy, to the cultural development of the Bahamian economy. So I think everyone has, over the years, has appreciated that and seen the value in it, because so many young persons have gone through the central bank's art program.
Not only the Central Bank of the Bahamas investment in the art program, but the Central Bank of the Bahamas was the first national art gallery, national reservoir for Bahamian art in the country. It was the place where art was kept. And so therefore, that's very, very significant.
The central bank formed or impacted the creative results here in the nation, mainly, I would say, through the competitions. The competitions are really the entryway here for young, aspiring artists, young talents to find a platform. So this art gallery was extremely important. Again, 40 years ago, we didn't have that. The National Art Gallery came over 10 years later. So the central bank is indeed one of the oldest cultural institutions in the country. And then with an art gallery which invited these talents to show their work and actually get a reaction, that's important. Believe it or not, the relationship between banks and art is not uncommon. So many of the major banks, they have some of the largest corporate art collections in the world. And so having said this, that Sir William Allen 40 years ago here in the Bahamas, we were still a young nation, initiated this program was quite visionary, because he understood that the central bank cannot only be the stalwart of our economy and of our currency, but it can also be, let's use a modern word, an incubator for creativity, and tap into the creative potential of a nation.
The reality is, it is difficult to put a value on art. And oftentimes it takes corporate sponsorship and it takes support from the financial world to support the arts. And so the Central Bank of the Bahamas made a commitment way back then with William Allen to fully support the arts. And the reality is, I would dare say that the art program would not be where it is today. The National Art Program would not be where it is today without the Central Bank of the Bahamas. Because, you know, you cannot quantify the investment in art. And so therefore, it takes an organization like the Central Bank of the Bahamas, who has plenty of money, deep pockets, and so we need to have somebody who has these great resources to say that I am going to, no matter what, I cannot quantify my investment, but I am going to establish an annual budget so that we can continue to support the creative community.
When I look now at these young people and what the gifts they have put forward in this country, in this small country, we have fantastic artists. And so when I look and see where we are now, and I think back to the fact that he wanted that. I'm proud of that, yes.
The central bank evolved as a surprising leader in the art world, but also led the charge in the Bahamas as it relates to technology, being first to take advantage of the advent of the World Wide Web, coding, and Ethernet networking technology.
We certainly created the first, and I will say this without quivering, the first Ethernet network in the Bahamas was at the Central Bank of the Bahamas. In an era when everything was frame relay and all the other sort of network technologies, we created an Ethernet network, because that's the kind of network that I was used to in the place of education where I came from. I had built an Ethernet network there, so I knew how to do it. That was one thing. CentralBankBahamas.com is another great thing that we would have accomplished. CentralBankBahamas.com, one of the first .coms created in this country, way back when. That's another, and one of the first websites built. The fact that we put personal computers on everybody's desks and also got everybody introduced to building their own stuff in Microsoft Word, and we introduced Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel, and people transitioned from Lotus 123. It was an exciting time, and working with every single department to build department-specific solutions for them that individuals could use really was a great time.
When you look at the central bank and where we were, it was important for us to embrace technology as a means of becoming a little bit more, not a little bit more, but more efficient in the way we delivered our services. And from a governance perspective as well. And this came across very clearly if you would look at exchange controls. You know, exchange controls was a very manual process, very paper-oriented process. And we couldn't continue that way. What was important for the central bank is to be able to get the information, because that information was an important input into compiling the balance of payments. But the way we were doing it, we needed to change.
The evolution and the modernization of the payment system in our economy, very, very important evolution, very important element to modernizing the way our economy functioned. At that point in the development of the economy, again, we're talking about the mid-90s into 2000. I think that there were a number of very significant changes going on, not only inside of the Bahamas, but certainly more importantly perhaps, outside of the Bahamas. We saw the development of, the beginnings of the development of the digital age, which today, 20 odd years later, we take for granted. But in fact, at that time, it was really just the beginning. I mean, we were still conducting our commercial banking activity in a very sort of basic way, very manual form, if you like. I mean, people went to the bank literally in person to do everything that they needed to do by way of banking. And we recognized in the central bank that we needed to bring the Bahamas into this new modern, more modern, if you like, period. Because, of course, on the outside of the Bahamas, even within the Caribbean, these reforms were already advancing.
So we got the banks to make changes in their systems, their general ledger system, in order to provide us with the information we needed. So we eliminated the dollar card. We eliminated the EC, we call it a EC1 form, and an import form that persons, if you recall, if you wanted to make, to send monies overseas, you had to go to the bank, you had to fill out a form. It was in triplicates. One had to come back to the central, or two come back to the central bank, and one stay with the banks. So we eliminated all of those things. And we didn't lose anything because we got the banks to send us the information that was necessary for us to track what was happening in the economy.
When we talk about the evolution of the payment system, what has also been significant for the Bahamas is that we enabled changes where banks were not the only ones that were providing payment services. So in the last half decade or more, we would have seen a lot of companies established, or companies that were previously just providing money transmission services get into the space of providing payment products. And so that leads into one of those, projects that is a very active one for the central bank, which is the sand dollar.
The currency department in the central bank is responsible for several award-winning bill and coin designs that embody cutting-edge technology.
The bank has always been fairly innovative around its banknotes. We've received multiple awards for banknotes and even a lot of accolades for coin designs. As of late, though, even more so, we've gotten quite a few awards for the New Crisp Evolution $50 banknote, which really combined two significant and new technologies that had never been combined before. I can speak very briefly about that, but that really looks at the substrate that the note is printed on, which is called DuraSafe, and the thread on the back of the note, which is called a Rapid, right? Those two technologies had never been combined before. And when we started looking at redesigning the $50 banknote 3 years before it was even released into circulation, we wanted to put these two technologies together. But we were told by the market, by all the institutional and international counterparts, that this could never happen. But we persevered, we pushed, we did all the research, we worked with our institutional partners, and in 2019 we were able to release that note. That really was a major accomplishment for a small country of 400,000 people that very many of our international counterparts had never even significantly heard of. But that note really changed what is considered the benchmark for technology in the banknote world.
$10, the first central bank digital currency in the world, made waves around the globe as the Bahamas established the prototype for digital currency to be traded dollar for dollar within the entire nation. This feat was a huge step forward for the central bank's vision of financial inclusion for all Bahamians.
We never intended, or our goal with Sand Dollar was never to be the first. We just identified an issue, and that was really and truly a problem or a challenge that the central bank in the country has had since inception, and that is providing equal opportunity and access to financial services throughout our 700 islands and keys.
Sand Dollar really was born out of the need for financial inclusion. We didn't start out thinking that we were going to issue a central bank digital currency for any innovative reason. We were simply trying to determine how do we get all of our brothers and sisters across the nation to have access to financial services. This was especially tricky in our case, as you had banks on certain islands pulling out because of lack of profitability and other reasons. But also, what really started the work here in a very aggressive way was after Hurricane Dorian, when we realized that we had two islands that were substantially impacted by this natural disaster, and we were not able to very quickly and actively return the island to a state where it was able to take advantage of banking services again. This, combined with the broader financial inclusion objectives, really is what sprung us into thinking that Sand Dollar, or a central bank digital currency, would be the solution.
So what came about, or what being first enabled, was that we get to write the book. There is no book, there is no map, there is no plan, but we get to influence the rest of the world as they bring on their digital currencies. We get to advise them. Their G6 countries are always looking to us for our advice as to what mistakes we made, what advice we have for them as they approach the same tactic. There's a sense of pride that the Bahamas should have as being, or through being, the first country to launch a central bank digital currency. We might not appreciate that in our lifetime, but it will certainly be something that is marked in the annals of time, and it's something that no one can take away from us.
Since its very inception, the Central Bank of the Bahamas has positioned itself as a beacon of opportunity for professionals with high aspirations. The central bank has established itself with a culture of excellence in its employees at every level of the organization, with high expectations and a robust approach to employee education. Sometimes this earns the bank a reputation of being elitist, but the stakeholders within the bank argue that they are not elitist, but simply committed to excellence.
Well, in the motto for the central bank, we speak to honesty and integrity, and I think that's a reflection of the culture in the organization and the kind of people that work in the organization, and the dedicated and hard-working emphasis that they place on their careers as central bankers.
Anytime anyone applies for a job at the central bank, and I've had an opportunity to really participate in those interviews, one of the things I've always said, to be a central banker, you have to be somebody who's just naturally curious. I mean, in order to really to do this job, you have to be somebody who wants to read, somebody who wants to do research, and amazingly, I don't think that is just for my department, bank supervision. I think it's really, for any department within the central bank, because once you say you're a central banker, once you say you're employed by the central bank, I find in dealing with the public, they feel as though you know everything as it relates to central bank. And so I'm in bank supervision, but I'm often asked exchange control questions. So I think it's important that you try to make yourself well-rounded.
So I often say that the staff members at the Central Bank of the Bahamas are some of the most educated in the country. There aren't too many places that you can have lunch in your cafeteria and speak about the economy and where it's going and get advice on not only financial services, but also on the flip side, if you wanted to, let's say, join an art program, or you want an art program for your child, that you have that expertise there.
The bank always had a mindset from its inception about being creative. When you're talking about the currency department and numismatic, that again was a center of creativity, because here you're looking and people are creating new notes and creating new ways to deal with economic data. It is an institution from its inception is always looking for a better way to do something, and that hasn't left the bloodstream of the bank. And I think that explains in part why the bank is always trying to do something better than it has always done, because that's in our DNA. That's how we do things.
We help shape the economy, and we are very pivotal or the work that we do is very pivotal in that. That's nothing to really be mediocre about.
I think one myth that I would like to dispel, I think the public has, and I probably have heard this more than once. There is the myth that the bank is elitist. I don't agree that the bank is elitist, but the bank does expect and demand a lot from its staff. It does expect and demand a lot from the economy. And for us to be able to deliver on those expectations, then it means that we need the very best people to do that.
I think it's important to note that the bank is a beacon of excellence, and I keep saying that. In its own quiet way, it contributes to the stability of our country. It contributes to the progress of our country. It is certainly, if we want to get into the innards of some of the things why the central bank is important, one of the things that keep this country, the Bahamas, as the Bahamas is the fact that we have a stable, on-par currency. And the central bank, that's one of their roles, is to work that and to make sure that that keeps on even keel. And the bank has done an incredible job. Regular Bahamians have been going to work for the last 50 years and making sure that is done. We have a huge financial center, nowhere near where it has been before, because it used to be one of the top financial centers in the world. And the central bank has been responsible for that financial center in terms of keeping it regulated and keeping it in keel and so forth. The central bank for the last 50 years have done an awesome job of ensuring that this second pillar of the country has remained a viable part of our economic sectors. And even the way we have kept that 50-year-old building intact is a credit to what the bank is all about, because that building is, if I would dare say, if most other people had that building to deal with, it would be on the ground in shambles. But we've managed to make it look like, and be like something that hasn't been around for 50 years.
Equality for women in the workplace has proven to be a decades-long struggle in much of the Western world. This, however, was not the culture of the Central Bank of the Bahamas. From the very beginning, its leadership sought to empower qualified women at every level of opportunity.
William, his dream and his focus was in bringing women into the central bank. And I always felt he had the strong women at the bank. I encouraged him to bring women place women in position. And he was always, always proud of the support he got from them. So that's a good thing.
So being appointed as the first female inspector of banks and trust companies, and of course the first Bahamian actually to hold that office, I think it's a very honorable position. You know, and I'm humbled, you know, that I was selected to aspire to this office. Through my 30-year journey, I would have had an opportunity to work under several inspectors. And they each brought their own unique style, their own unique focus to this role. And so I had an opportunity to almost sit at the feet of those that were before me, my predecessors, and learn from their experiences and what they contributed. Being appointed in the role of inspector of banks and trust companies, yes, there was certainly fear, stepping into very big shoes, and having the comfort level to know that, hey, I can do this. And also excitement, because I recognize, you know, the importance of not just stepping into the role, but what it meant now for a Bahamian really to be that front-facing person locally in the domestic sector and in the international settings to represent my country in this very important function. And so there was fear and excitement, but you know, I think what was so important for me is to see the overwhelming support that I got internally from my colleagues, as well as from the industry at large, the well wishes that came, and I think it was quite you know, reassuring that I'm going to be okay.
The future of the central bank is being written each day by its team of talented professionals. These individuals do the hard work of protecting the financial interest of Bahamians from all walks of life through their commitment to evolving with our swiftly changing global financial landscape.
So as we approach the 50th anniversary of the Central Bank of the Bahamas, I think what's important to really recognize is that the work that the Central Bank does today is really based on the strength of all of the work of the people who've come before us. The past governors and deputy governors, the past leadership in general, they did incredible work that allowed us to now sit on top of that and refine some of those activities. What that also means for us is that we still have a lot to do. We have ongoing exchange control reforms. We have ongoing work that's happening in the financial services sector, looking at things like continuing the work around Sand Dollar and how do we get Sand Dollar adopted nationwide. This is we have done a lot. But as we approach the 50th anniversary and we continue that work, it's important for us to realize that there is no end goal here. We will continue to persevere and make sure that we continue the bank's mandate.
As the country grows, its central bank grows. So as the Bahamas develops in terms of its economy and in terms of what we do, as the younger persons who are coming up in this country come up with new ideas, new products in financial services, new things happening in tourism, new industries being placed into the country. We're talking about natural resources and developing those and having sovereign funds and on and on. And as the world starts to change, the central bank, as it ought to, will evolve and will step up to meet those changes, continue to grow in size and purpose, but its underpinnings will be the same. It will be responsible for monetary stability and for ensuring that the lives of Bahamians are not kept in limbo by unforeseen things that the bank is supposed to be taking care of.
The central bank, again, sits at the apex of our financial system. It has to have proper procedures. It has to have the staffing to carry out its functions. This 50th year, I'm thankful for my 37 years that I had in the central bank and for the impact that I would have had on the operations, especially during the blacklistings and coming out of it. I'm proud of what the central bank has achieved, and I want everybody to know that your role, no matter how mundane some of the projects and assignments are, they are important. Don't take the central bank for granted. You are at the apex of the system, and it takes everybody. It does not take the governor alone, or the deputy governor, or the managers. They need everybody working together for the good of the country.
Well, I would say that the most important thing that we should do is to continue to be open to change, and to continue to strive for the kinds of changes that make, financial services more accessible and easier for the local or the Bahamian constituents, to appreciate the importance of that. Also to recognize that we want to do a lot more in ways that would benefit how this economy can grow and thrive, much more than it presently is. And that means, as a central bank, being able to put the resources and the emphasis in building up people, the people who carry the weight of the work of the organization.
50 years is a very long time. You don't think that when you're close to 50, but certainly we can all remember that when we were children, 50 seemed so far away. And on its 50th birthday, I want to say to the Central Bank of the Bahamas, you have done a phenomenal job, and I know that the next 50 will be even greater.
It's just amazing where we are. We're grown up. I think we started as children creeping, and now we're a full-grown, internationally recognized central bank. That's a lot to be proud of.
And Lyford Key, I'm Tanya Smith Cartwright. This is ZNS.
Yeah, if I don't ever see you no more.
Overdose. Well, hey everybody, it's Fonte.
And I'm your girl, Nika V.
And welcome back to season 2, episode 2 of
The Drop.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have such an exciting show lined up for you today. We are sitting with Madia